Imagine a small, wrinkled bean tumbling through a woman's hands on a dusty Sahelian afternoon. It fits in the palm like a coin, but it carries inside it something that modern agriculture has largely forgotten: the 9 essential amino acids every human must get from food. It is a complete protein that grows where maize withers, where soy fails, and where even peanuts, once the region's favored export, struggle without heavy inputs. This is the Bambara groundnut. 16 to 25% protein, remarkable levels of lysine, tryptophan and methionine, and a secret ability to give nitrogen back to the soil, roughly 40 to 80 kilos per hectare, while surviving with as little as 300 millimeters of rain. And yet, despite what it offers, it has been overlooked by major development funders, including the World Bank. There is a paradox in that line. Nutritionally dense, climate-resilient, largely self-sufficient and underfunded. If this surprises you, subscribe. There's more to uncover. For millennia, farmers across the West African highlands cultivated this crop as part of a living tapestry of fields. It did not grow alone. Women planted it alongside millet and sorghum, scattering seeds into the same patch that held cassava and vegetables. The plant's vines crept between stalks, its small pods tucked into the earth until harvest. Families stored its flour in clay jars and woven sacks. Households say the flour keeps well, sometimes for up to 3 years, preserving food security through lean seasons. Its local names point to its closeness to people, names that speak of kinship, of specific communities who carried the seed through generations. This is important because food systems are not only about calories, they are about the molecules that those calories carry. A grain-heavy diet can leave a person full and yet malnourished if it lacks essential amino acids. Those 9 molecules, the ones our bodies cannot make, govern growth, immunity, and the repair of tissue. Bambara is unusual among legumes because it supplies all 9. More than that, compared with other common legumes, its profile stands out. Lysine appears at nearly twice the level found in comparable pulses, tryptophan at about double, and methionine at about 7 times the concentration you see in many other legumes. In practical terms, that means a child eating Bambara alongside sorghum is getting complementary nutrition that closes gaps other crops leave open. It's the difference between a stomach that is full and a body that is truly fed. Beyond amino acids, Bambara quietly improves the very ground it grows in. It is a nitrogen fixer. Through its root associations, it deposits roughly 40 to 80 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare back into depleted soils. For farmers practicing intercropping, this is not an abstract benefit. It translates into yields. Observations from field systems show intercrop farmers receiving grain boosts of about 20 to 30% for their companion cereals. This is free fertilizer in any farmer's language, a deposit into soil fertility that reduces dependence on purchased nitrogen inputs. But the story of Bambara is also a human story of choices made far beyond the farm. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, colonial administrations built their agricultural systems with a particular goal in mind: revenue and raw materials. Peanuts became the favored cash crop because they produced oil for industry and tax income for colonial coffers. Rail lines, storage, research stations, and seed distribution networks were developed to serve that export economy. When official agricultural surveys documented local crops, they often noted Bambara's virtues, its resilience, its role in household diets, and then, systematically, prioritized investments that supported the export crop model. Those decisions reshaped landscapes. Land that might once have grown a diversity of resilient staples moved toward monocultures. Research, extension services, and infrastructure followed the export markets, where markets reward purchases of hybrid seeds, fertilizer, pesticides. The incentives for pushing input-free, locally maintained crops become weak. After independence, the pattern continued in a different guise. Development models associated with the Green Revolution promoted packages of improved seeds plus fertilizer and agrochemicals. That model worked in certain temperate, irrigated contexts. It was less well suited to the marginal, rain-fed lands where much of West Africa's smallholder agriculture operates. Still, financial instruments, loan programs, and global agricultural research tended to favor technologies that created steady markets for bought inputs. Put bluntly, crops that require repeated purchases create customers. Crops that reproduce easily in farmers' hands do not. Global fertilizer supply chains and agrochemical markets have scales measured in tens of billions. The nitrogen market runs roughly around $60 billion. Pesticides and related inputs sit on a similarly vast economic floor. When institutional funding flows are aligned with creating input markets, farming systems that thrive without those inputs are easy to overlook. That is not to say anyone sat down and decided to erase Bambara. Rather, it is a pattern, priorities set by revenue, research funding by potential market uptake, and extension services scaling technologies that promise visible, quick yield increases where purchased inputs are available. The consequences have been technical and social. Seed systems that once were community-regulated were disrupted by hybrid seed distributions and by policies that favored uniform high-input crops. Women, who have been primary custodians of Bambara seeds and knowledge, often found their practices sidelined in research agendas that emphasized monocrops and mechanized production. Yet in the shadow of those policies, women preserved. They kept seed in earthen pots. They selected for drought tolerance and taste. They traded and negotiated seed across markets and kinship lines. Their custodianship maintained not only a genetic resource, but a whole body of agronomic knowledge about planting times, intercropping rhythms, and storage techniques. Where extension neglected Bambara, women kept it alive. Today, with a climate that is more volatile and rainfall patterns less predictable, the traits preserved in those seed banks of human memory are suddenly urgent. Bambara's capacity to yield with as little as about 300 millimeters of rain contrasts with crops that require much more moisture. Peanuts frequently need around 500 millimeters, soy around 600. In a Sahel shaped by erratic rains and heat spikes, a crop bred by farmers to survive here has an outsized role to play. Universities and international bodies are framing climate-smart crops as a category. Yet institutional response has been slow. Funding priorities still often channel toward projects that plug into existing input markets or toward technologies whose rollout is simple to measure. Hectares of hybrid seed planted, tons of fertilizer sold. A resilient, low-input crop that supports seed sovereignty and reduces dependence on imported inputs looks less attractive on those balance sheets. There is a dramatic irony here. A solution that at field scale often grows for free, providing protein, building soil and storing well, becomes economically invisible because it does not generate the kinds of returns development finance is structured to reward. The World Bank and similar institutions shape agricultural priorities through lending, project design, and technical programs. Where their funding emphasizes input-based productivity increases, crops like Bambara fall outside the main lanes of investment. That is a matter of priorities and systems, not of simple neglect alone. It is also an opportunity. Redirecting even a fraction of programmatic funding toward community seed systems, participatory breeding, and locally led extension could magnify Bambara's impact without imposing costly external inputs. To make that shift responsibly requires more than headlines. It requires policies that recognize and fund decentralized seed systems, programs that support women's stewardship of seed as a public good, and research that partners with farmers rather than replacing them. It means investing in small-scale processing facilities so that Bambara-based foods can reach urban markets as snacks and flowers, creating value chains that benefit producer communities. It means funding long-term trials in diverse agroecological settings so breeders can accelerate varieties adapted to changing climates while ensuring those varieties remain under farmer control. And it means pairing technical support with market development that does not coerce farmers into dependency on purchased inputs. There are already signs of this kind of work at the margins. In markets from Lagos to Ouagadougou, entrepreneurs are experimenting with Bambara flowers, roasted snacks, and nutrient-dense products for urban consumers. Local cooperatives are organizing seed exchanges, and NGOs are documenting land races and the practices women use to select them. When scientists partner with these networks, results can be immediate. Farmers report more stable harvests across dry spells, and communities that integrate Bambara into household diets note fewer gaps in protein intake during lean months. These are not promises of a miracle crop, but evidence of a resilient piece in a much larger puzzle. We must also be clear-eyed about trade-offs. Scaling Bambara without care could lead to homogenization if market demand pushes toward a single, improved variety. The path forward must preserve genetic diversity and the autonomy of the farmers who steward it. Policy levers exist. Public procurement programs can create reliable demand for diverse smallholder-produced foods. Research grants can require open germplasm and participatory methods. Extension services can prioritize low-input integrated systems rather than one-size-fits-all packages. Such measures align incentives with resilience rather than with steady sales of inputs. At the heart of this story are the women who carried the seed through the disruptions of colonial extraction and post-colonial modernization. Their labor in selecting for taste, storage, and drought tolerance is a form of scientific practice, carefully applied, learned over generations, and adapted to the rhythms of the land. When policymakers and funders finally notice Bambara, it will be because these women kept it alive in baskets and clay jars, not because an institution discovered it anew. Respecting that lineage means any effort to scale must be collaborative and reparative, not extractive. So what can be done concretely? First, development finance can broaden its metrics so that the value of reduced input dependency, soil regeneration, and seed sovereignty counts alongside yield per hectare. Second, program funds can be earmarked specifically for participatory breeding and support for local processing infrastructure. Third, governments can revise procurement and school feeding contracts to create markets for locally produced, nutrient-dense legumes. Fourth, seed policies can be reoriented to protect farmers' rights to save, use, and exchange seed, recognizing that community-held seed banks are public assets in the face of climate risk. Finally, consumers and urban entrepreneurs can help create demand for Bambara-based foods that return value to rural producers rather than redirecting profits toward distant input suppliers. The road is not simple, and no single crop will solve malnutrition or climate vulnerability. But the contrast is stark. A plant that contains the 9 essential amino acids, that feeds soil as it grows, that stores well and requires little external input, and yet remains on the periphery of funding and research priorities. That contrast forces a question about how we measure agricultural progress. Do we invest in systems that lock farmers into perpetual purchase cycles? Or do we invest in the seeds and the people who have for generations bred resilience into the landscape? Picture finally a seed vault that is not made of concrete and climate controls, but of hands, kitchen jars, and the slow geography of women's networks. Imagine opening that vault to find not a single elite variety, but a constellation of landraces, each tuned to a narrow pocket of soil and rain. The vault is vulnerable to neglect, to policy blindness, to the lures of quick-growth market models. But it is also, quietly, a source of solutions that do not require the constant churn of external inputs. If you care about how we adapt food systems to an uncertain climate, consider lifting this seed out of obscurity. Share this film with someone who works on agriculture policy. Support organizations that fund community seed banks and participatory breeding, and local and international funders to redirect a portion of agricultural finance towards seed sovereignty and low-input, nutrient-dense crops. The change we need is at once technical and political. It is in the way we prioritize, fund, and listen. The next vault opens soon. Subscribe to follow the investigation into other neglected crops and the people who have kept them. Share this story to help a seed move from the archive into the fields where it belongs.